Hello and welcome to the PAL 15 podcast. I'm your host Matt and I'm joined today by PAL 15 partner Werner Moison and strategic consultant Jesse Muller. Great to have you back on the show, guys. How are you both doing?
Very well, thank you, Matt. Great to be back.
Yeah, happy to be back. Nice to chat to you as always. So looking forward.
It's always great to have you both here. Let's dive into today's episode then, get into it quickly. At PAL 15, we're seeing and working with managed service providers who are dealing with a whole heap of challenges at the moment, and not least a specific challenge in how complex their kind of service offerings and service lists are. And one of the things that we've been thinking about behind the scenes is about how MSPs can structure their portfolios in a way that not only helps them solve those challenges, but also helps them communicate their own story in a way that helps fuel future growth. So, Jesse, maybe let's turn to you first. Could you shed some light on some of the challenges that MSPs are facing at the moment when it comes to structuring their services?
Yeah, of course. What we see happening in the market is that there's a lot of competition. Managed service providers really need to differentiate themselves to ensure profitability. A lot of MSPs have a technical story, and that's usually a list of complex service descriptions with a description of what it is that they actually sell. It's very complicated. It's quite hard to structure and sometimes even harder to communicate. And what you see a lot is that internal struggles happening, that, technical people that are very smart can do a great amount of things and really help customers achieve amazing results. But write down what they do in a very technical way, and it's hard for salespeople or for marketing people to then properly tell the structure. That's one part of it. And another part of it is that it's not only complex in that nature from a technical perspective, but also in the amount of services that are available. There's more and more technology that replaces sort of manual work, basically. And there's more and more technology that helps businesses grow. That means that there's also more managed service providers typically start to offer. So there's a big need in sort of structuring that whole portfolio in a way that makes sense. That's basically the main thing that we see happening. And structuring that is one of the key things that we do as PAL 15, and it's one of the biggest challenges that we try to solve for our MSP customers.
Creating that kind of service portfolio in a clear, structured way, then, if it's as complex as we kind of think it is, it sounds like that's going to be quite a complicated task. And especially, as you say, Jesse, if a service provider has kind of naturally grown over the years and has this kind of web of services that they've kind of just naturally progressed into. So, Werner, maybe you could outline some of the most kind of dangerous pitfalls, I suppose, that service providers should look out for.
Yeah, of course. And I think actually Jesse already sort of touched on a couple. I think in general, right, if you look at a lot of these MSP portfolios, sometimes the structure on itself is missing a bit, right? So they grew over the years. They've developed new services, and you basically get an add-on, another add-on, another add-on. So, for example, look at a sales deck, or if you look at a website, it sometimes feels like a bit of an a la carte menu, right? So, okay, pick and choose. And I think what service providers shouldn't sort of forget about is that in general, customers, they don't really know what they need, right? So they should come to your website, or they should get into a conversation with your, let's say, your sales force. And then you should be able to present them with that 3 or 4 or 5 course meal, right? If we get into the restaurant analogy. So yeah, MSP should structure their portfolio looking at actual customer needs, right? Skip the more techie part, right? The tech content will come at a later stage. But initially it's about, okay, how can you help your customers from a business point of view, right? What is it that your customer needs, right? What is their pain? What is their gain? And how can you actually address those needs in a structured way? Right, so structure the portfolio either in categories or in solution areas, and then make sure there's a clear and concise pitch per solution. So that is, I think, one. Two is probably what we see happening quite a lot is that service providers, sort of forget to talk about their added value, right? So there's still quite a lot of resellers that actually say, hey, look, there's a piece of technology, right? Whether it's a Microsoft technology, whether it's AWS or Red Hat, doesn't really matter. And then they just talk about the technology, right? And talk about the SKU or the product that is delivered by an hyperscaler. Whereas the reason for a customer to actually work with you is if you can clarify, okay, but what am I then going to do to help that customer, right? To implement it, to manage it, to optimize it. And so what is the added value that you bring as a service provider? What is eventually why the customer should work with you? And so making sure you approach your propositions and messaging customer and value first instead of just technology and very product focused, I think is still what we see quite a lot. And as Jesse mentioned, right, that is obviously our bread and butter, right, helping service providers and other B2B tech companies with that translation. And then at the same time, if you look at the messaging component, right, like I already said, when it comes to propositions, you need to make it specific to the audience, right? And that's not only on the solution level, but also on the messaging level, right? So there shouldn't be like a one size fits all kind of story. But if you focus on specific verticals or if you focus on specific lines of businesses, make sure you tailor that story that actually fits the need of that audience. And also there, we still see quite a lot of these, one size fits all or just one common story for all the audiences. Whilst it's good to actually understand, hey, wait a sec, who is my buyer audience? What kind of personas can I define? And can I tailor the message to make sure these people actually understand how we are going to solve either their potential blockers or challenges, or how we're going to help them, right? Because, for example, if you look at a decision-making unit, the story you want to have towards, for example, a CEO or COO is slightly different than to a procurement team, right? Or to a legal officer or whatnot, because all these people have different kinds of issues. These are some challenges we see in quite often, right? In a lot of situations. So not a clear portfolio, quite some tech talk to start with, and not always clear about the value that you add to specific groups of customers.
Yeah, sometimes there's also a problem with lack of standardization, right? So that every customer gets a new solution or a new package of services every time. So I think that's also something we sometimes help solve, is that, okay, how do we package that in the right way so that you actually 80% of the time deliver something that is sort of standard, so that you can scale it a bit faster as well.
No, 100%. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you're trying to sell something to a customer. And more importantly, maybe even you're also creating a more standardized upsell route, right? So if you've seen a solution A and then solution B and solution C sort of being sold to customer number one, it will probably also work for customer number 2, 3, and 4, right? So standardizing your go-to-market, standardizing propositions, and the story around it is for sure something we see also quite often as a need, right?
I think it also sort of highlights your value as a trusted partner to your customers, that you can sort of define, okay, these are the things that always match together and that always part of the solution because we think they should be. And you might say, oh, I'll pick and choose, or we do everything because you are so different. There's a sort of standardization in the approach, which means that it's a certain bar of entry or sort of level of quality that we always deliver, no matter what the customer is.
So I'm interested to hear you talk about standardization in those terms. That kind of makes sense to me. But then also, as you said, Werner, it is still important to keep that kind of custom messaging that's appropriate to each audience. Finding that kind of balance of standardized structures, services, upsell routes exactly for internal processes, but then making sure everything is really applicable to each customer that you're trying to hit.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of focus, right? So obviously you're not going to create stories for 50 different verticals or 50 different lines of businesses, right? But what you often see is that, for example, if you look at a typical MSP, right, so they probably have some kind of an infrastructure proposition, a workplace proposition, and a security proposition with a certain audience, right? So try and focus on the audiences that you're after, and try and focus on, okay, what is the story that I actually want to talk about to that audience, and put that on the sales assets, or that should be the sales message, right? So 100% agree that you're not going to create 50 different stories, but you do want to articulate, hey, this is how we are going to help you with this specific proposition, and then address certain vertical challenges or lines of business challenges that you help to solve. Yeah, and then on that standardization, right? That's also more on, sort of say the solution level, right? So making sure when you sell, for example, a managed workplace solution, that you're clear about, hey, what are the services that are included, right, at the beginning of the customer journey, but also in the end, right, when you're trying to continuously manage and optimize the IT solution that you've delivered to the customer.
It's interesting as well that you've kind of mentioned stories quite often there, because when you're thinking about kind of the first steps to building and structuring your portfolio, Jesse, maybe you could talk to us about the first things that you really need to consider. And I'd say that getting that story in place is pretty key there. We often have a saying here, which is the story is the strategy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the story is the strategy also for MSPs. Some of our customers are simpler in that nature, right? They have less of a portfolio with all kinds of things in there. But especially with service providers, a story can really tie everything together. And it doesn't end at the highest level of in the hierarchy of the business, right? So the story is not just who we are and what we deliver in generally. It's also all those solutions tie into that as well, and define also what that story is. So some minor service providers might be focused more on workspace offerings, others might be focused more on data and AI offerings. Well, that really influences how we talk about what kind of narrative you build towards the end customers and how you want to structure that. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. It's not just a separate exercise. It really ties into the overall company positioning, the overall company narrative. Then the second part is, okay, then we need to figure out how to structure that thing, right? So what are the solutions that we want to focus on? What are the services that are under that solution? But also that piece you want to structure a bit. So you want to take a look, and that's what we usually do, is what is the methodology of delivering those solutions, right? Is there something that you need to do in the first step, and then in the second step, and the third or fourth step? And what are the services within each of those phases of a customer engagement? Because that also simplifies it for everyone to tell that story in an easier way.
That's also often where differentiation obviously comes from, right, Jesse? So you have to sort of the what and the how, right, in that sense. And a lot of, let's be fair, a lot of solutions are sometimes a bit sort of commoditized and similar to what others might offer. But you can also very much differentiate in how you do that, right? And that starts with, well, what is that initial customer engagement? How are you going to identify the opportunity? What is actually needed? All the way down to your almost managed approach to, well, not only support the customer sort of reactive, but proactively also look at, okay, what else can we do, right? Is there a need to further optimize? Should we focus on, for example, I don't know, adoption, usage kind of services, or can we help them to get more out of their IT investment? So that how part that you just described, that methodology is very very interesting to also look at. Hey, what is actually the true uniqueness? Sometimes overlooked, right? Sometimes we're in these sessions with customers where it's like, oh yeah, we also have this service, right? And it feels normal to them, and they never really talk about it because for them it's like, that this is what we've been doing already for the last 5 years, 10 years. But based on our experience working with, well, hundreds of these service providers, sometimes like, really, hey, wait a sec, you should talk about this, right? Because this is so unique, and this is something you should bring to the surface.
And one additional key element there, I think, is also not only what you're doing now, but also what you want to do in the future. So where you want to go, right? So what is on the roadmap? What are the things that you want to develop? Because I think it's also key to take that into account when defining that structure. Not only to maybe also already start talking about it in some way to make sure that the customers and prospects understand where you as a provider are going and what you might be able to deliver in the future, but also to structure that portfolio in a way so that it leaves room for future developments as well. So I think that's also a key part of our job, is to make sure that, hey, it's not only something that works today, but can also work in a year or in 2 or 3 years. And together with that, aligned with that is also that those upsell routes and those cross-sell routes, right? So not only structuring it in a way that it makes sense, but also that it provides a way for you to start somewhere as a customer and go from there into different areas, or and for the MSP to upsell the customer towards higher tiers of service, or to add more services and solutions to it. Because obviously, we're trying to help them grow. So those ambitions should also shape the portfolio in a way.
Well, that's brilliant, guys. Thank you for sharing all that, Werner and Jesse. Hope to have you back on the podcast soon.
Cheers, Matt.
Yeah,
Great
look
to
forward.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening today. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Power 15 podcast, make sure to like, subscribe, and review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also find us on LinkedIn and power15.com. We'll be back soon with more insight from our team. But for now, thank you for listening.